I found out my wife was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in November, and the doctor's smile didn't reach my ears the way it should have. It wasn't because I didn't want a child, I did. It was because I knew I couldn't be the father. A medical diagnosis from years ago had made that clear. Still, she held the ultrasound photo with tears in her eyes, whispering how perfect our life would be now. I smiled back, but inside something broke. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 38 years old, an architect in Chicago, a man who has built skyscrapers with precision and detail, but somehow missed the cracks forming in his own home. My wife, Claire, and I had been married for 7 years. We had weathered storms, or at least I thought we had. We lived in a modest house just outside the city, a place filled with photographs, routines, and quiet promises. But that day, the silence between us grew heavy. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply nodded when she talked about nursery colors and baby names. Because if there's one thing I've learned from both my work and my life, it's this: structures don't collapse from a single hit. They crumble from stress lines, from pressure left unchecked. And I needed to find those lines. That night, while she slept, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. I wrote 3 words: freeze, track, respond. It was the same system I used when projects threatened to spiral out of control. My personal life was no different now. I couldn't shout. I couldn't confront. I had to move quietly, like an architect reinforcing a building before demolition. It didn't take long to see the signs I had ignored. Claire's sudden late nights at work. Her phone flipped face down on the table. The way she laughed harder at my younger brother Adam's jokes than she ever laughed at mine. Adam, 3 years younger, charming, reckless, the kind of man people forgive too easily. He had always been part of our lives: Sunday dinners, birthdays, family trips. I had trusted him completely. Too completely. My mother didn't help. She adored Adam, always had. He was her golden boy, the one she protected even when he stumbled. When Claire started leaning on her for advice, spending afternoons with Mom, more than usual, I didn't think much of it. But now, in the shadow of the truth, I could see it clearly. They weren't just covering for late nights or missed calls. They were building a wall around me, brick by brick, hoping I wouldn't notice. I stayed silent. I watched. I tracked. Every conversation, every glance, every whisper between Claire and Adam at family gatherings was logged in my mind. They thought I was blind, but architects see details others miss. And I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them in private. I wouldn't beg for explanations behind closed doors. No, this betrayal deserved light, not shadows. So I began to wait, patiently, quietly, for the one night when every secret would be forced into the open. Christmas Eve dinner. The entire family gathered. The perfect stage. And when the moment came, I would expose them both. Once I decided on Christmas Eve, everything shifted. The days no longer passed in confusion. They became preparation. I moved quietly, every step measured, every detail recorded. If my wife and my brother thought I was blind, I would let them believe it a little longer. Let them relax. Let them grow careless. I began with small observations. Claire's phone vibrated late at night. She would glance at the screen, press it down against the table, and murmur that it was just a client. I didn't ask questions. I noted the time. The next morning, I checked Adam's social media. Posts disappeared around the same hours. The pattern repeated until it no longer felt like coincidence. Then I turned my attention to my mother. She had always been protective of Adam, but lately, she seemed invested in Claire in a way that didn't feel maternal. She insisted Claire rest more, offered to take her to appointments, made excuses for her absences. At first, I thought it was grandmotherly instinct, but then I realized my mother wasn't just being supportive. She was shielding her, covering tracks before they could even be noticed. I stayed calm. I played the dutiful husband. I painted the nursery walls with Claire, smiled at her excitement, and carried groceries with my mother when she insisted on helping. On the surface, I was the same Daniel I had always been. Underneath, I was building my case. At work, I reviewed building plans during the day, but at night, I created a different kind of blueprint. Phone logs, calendar entries, bank statements. Every number told a story if you knew where to look. Small charges that matched Adam's favorite restaurants. Appointments that overlapped with his free days. Even a gas receipt from a station 2 blocks from his apartment, charged on Claire's card during a time she claimed to be visiting my mother. The pieces fit together with the precision of steel beams locking into place. Still, I didn't confront. Confrontation gives power to the guilty. No, I needed their lies to grow heavy enough that when I cut the rope, they would collapse under their own weight. I thought about my students sometimes, the way they fidget when they know they've been caught, but hope the teacher won't notice. That was Claire now. That was Adam. Their laughter was a little too sharp, their touches a little too rehearsed, my mother's defense of them a little too quick. They thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was. One evening, as I passed the hallway, I caught Claire on the phone. She didn't see me. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. She said, "Don't worry. He suspects nothing. Mom's keeping him calm." I walked past without stopping, my face unreadable. Inside, my plan solidified. Christmas Eve wasn't just going to be a family dinner. It would be the unveiling of every secret they thought they had buried. And I would be the one to pull back the curtain. The closer December crept, the more I noticed the tension. It wasn't just in Claire's voice or Adam's nervous jokes. It was in the way my mother hovered, too eager to smooth over even the smallest crack. They were all playing a part, and I was the silent audience, watching every move. At work, my colleagues asked if I was ready for the holidays, if I had finished shopping. I nodded, smiling politely, but in my head I was designing something more intricate than any building I had ever sketched. Every conversation, every receipt, every careless glance between Claire and Adam became another beam in the structure I was preparing to unveil. I gathered evidence with the same discipline I brought to my profession. Bank records printed and dated. Call logs matched to overlapping times. Screenshots of messages Claire thought she had deleted but hadn't cleared from the cloud. Even my mother's notes, lists she kept for appointments, that aligned perfectly with Claire's unexplained absences. It was all there, waiting in neat folders. Yet I never confronted. Silence was my weapon. If I revealed what I knew too early, they would close ranks, adjust their lies, find new ways to hide. Instead, I let them believe I was oblivious. I let them laugh at my expense. And every time they did, I felt the moment of exposure draw closer. The pregnancy was my undeniable proof, the one fact that couldn't be erased or twisted. I had lived with my diagnosis for years. It was private, something I had rarely spoken about. Now, it became my anchor. No matter what they said, no matter how they spun their story, biology would betray them. I didn't even need a test yet. The truth was already written in their desperation to keep me quiet. At family dinners before Christmas, I played my role. I asked Claire how she felt, offered her more food, smiled at my mother when she insisted I stop fussing. Adam cracked jokes about fatherhood, and I let him. My silence encouraged their arrogance. They thought I was too trusting, too naive. They thought I hadn't seen the late-night texts, the way Claire's hand brushed against Adam's arm when she thought no one was watching, the pride in my mother's eyes as she shielded them both. But I had seen everything. The strange part was how calm I felt. Most men would rage, confront, demand answers. I chose patience, because patience turns evidence into a weapon sharper than anger. One night, alone in my study, I spread out the folders across the desk. The timeline was perfect. Every lie lined up against fact, every secret caught in the web they had spun. I closed the last folder and whispered to myself what I had already decided weeks ago. Christmas Eve, the night my family gathered around the table, they would expect tradition, laughter, gifts exchanged under twinkling lights. What they wouldn't expect was the truth laid bare in front of them all. And when it came, I wouldn't need to shout. The silence leading up to it would make the fall echo louder than any voice ever could. By mid-December, my plan was no longer a thought. It was a structure ready to stand. I knew exactly how I would expose them, and I knew the moment had to be Christmas Eve. Not because I wanted to ruin the holiday for everyone, but because they had chosen that stage themselves. They wanted family gathered, warmth and laughter masking betrayal. That was the night they would least expect me to break the silence. I spent the days leading up to it reinforcing my case. Every evening, when Claire was asleep, I reviewed the files. Bank statements, call logs, overlapping travel times. Each piece was organized, not for confrontation, but for precision. I wasn't going to scream accusations across the table. I was going to lay out facts so cold, so undeniable, that even my mother's defenses would shatter. It wasn't just evidence I prepared. I prepared myself. I rehearsed calm responses in my head, practiced steady breathing, reminded myself that silence was my ally. Rage is loud, but rage can be dismissed as hysteria. Calm is harder to ignore. Judges know it, teachers know it, and I was about to show my family that truth delivered quietly cuts deeper than any outburst. Claire was glowing with false confidence. She decorated the tree, wrapped gifts, talked about the future as though nothing weighed on her. Sometimes I caught her glancing at her phone with a softness that wasn't meant for me. Adam visited under excuses, dropping by to help Mom or check on Claire. I let it happen. Every visit only deepened their sense of safety. They thought the secret was secure. My mother played her part too. She insisted I stop working so hard, that I should enjoy the season. She offered to host Christmas Eve dinner at her house, but I told her it should be in mine. She hesitated, then smiled too quickly. That smile told me everything. She wanted control of the stage, but I had already claimed it. At school, I finished grading finals and locked away the last of my projects. My colleagues wished me happy holidays. I nodded, wishing them the same, while inside I carried a countdown. Each day closer to Christmas was another turn of the screw. On the 23rd, Claire and my mother spent the afternoon together, shopping, wrapping, laughing when they returned. I helped carry bags inside, steady and silent. They thought I was the dependable husband, the son who never questioned. They didn't realize they were walking straight into the fire they had built themselves. That night, when the house was dark, I opened the closet and pulled out the single envelope I had prepared. Inside was the timeline of betrayal, neatly typed, with supporting evidence attached. I slid it into my jacket pocket and stood there for a long moment, staring at the tree glowing in the corner of the room. Tomorrow, under those same lights, I would break the silence. Not with shouting, but with truth. And once spoken, there would be no way back. Christmas Eve arrived with the weight of inevitability. Snow fell in slow silence outside, the kind of night that seemed perfect on the surface. Inside, the house glowed with lights, the smell of roasted turkey drifting from the kitchen, laughter echoing from the living room. Family gathered as though nothing was broken. They didn't know the floor beneath them was about to give way. I moved through the evening as though nothing had changed. I carried trays, poured wine, and smiled when people offered holiday cheer. Claire stayed close to my mother, both of them whispering and smiling too tightly. Adam arrived late, apologizing with his usual charm, handing out gifts as though generosity could hide guilt. I nodded at him once, my face unreadable. He grinned back, confident. The dinner table stretched long, candles flickering down the center, glasses filled, plates heaped high. Conversations overlapped, relatives catching up, children running in and out of the room. To anyone else, it looked like a perfect holiday gathering. To me, it was the stage I had been waiting for. I let the meal progress. I listened as Adam told stories, as Claire laughed too loudly, as my mother cut off any remark that might wander too close to the truth. I spoke little, answering when spoken to, keeping my voice steady. The silence around me grew heavier with each passing minute. Halfway through the meal, Claire reached for my hand. It was an act for the room, a gesture to maintain the illusion. I let her hold it, my expression calm, my mind elsewhere. She thought she still had control. She thought my silence meant ignorance. She couldn't see that silence was the trap itself. I studied every face around that table, the cousins, the uncles, the aunts, all gathered for tradition. None of them knew what was hidden beneath the smiles. None of them knew the betrayal sitting across from me, or the mother who had helped bury it. That was about to change. As dessert was served, I slid the envelope from my jacket and placed it beside my plate. The motion was quiet, almost invisible, but my mother noticed. Her eyes flickered, the first crack in her composure all night. Adam laughed at something one of the kids said, unaware of the shift. Claire squeezed my hand tighter, not realizing the reason for my calm. The moment was almost here. I raised my glass when the table quieted for a toast. I spoke slowly, deliberately, my voice carrying just enough to be heard above the soft hum of conversation. I thanked everyone for coming, for being family, for being part of our lives. My words were measured, polite. No one suspected the knife hidden inside them. Then I set the glass down, slid the envelope to the center of the table, and leaned back. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before a storm, and I was ready to let it break. The envelope sat in the middle of the table like an unexploded charge. For a moment, no one moved. The chatter died away, replaced by the clink of a fork being set down, the hush of curiosity. My mother's smile stiffened. Claire glanced from me to the envelope, her hand frozen halfway to her glass. Adam leaned back in his chair, still smirking, still blind. I didn't speak right away. Silence did the work for me. The longer I let it hang, the heavier it grew. Finally, I slid the envelope toward Claire. She hesitated, then opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were neatly typed pages, phone logs, receipts, messages, the timeline I had built piece by piece. Each sheet was a shard of glass reflecting the truth. The room held its breath. Claire's face drained of color as she read. Her hand shook. My mother leaned toward her, whispering quickly, urging her to close it, to stop. But it was too late. The evidence was out, plain, undeniable. Adam's smirk faltered when his name appeared on the page. She turned. His eyes darted to me, searching for anger. I gave him none. Just silence. I spoke only once, my voice calm, level cold. I said that Claire was pregnant, and that it could not be mine. The words were simple, steady, and final. Gasps spread across the table. Forks clattered onto plates. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The children were ushered into the other room, unaware of the storm breaking around them. Claire tried to speak, but her voice cracked, collapsing under the weight of the truth she couldn't contain anymore. My mother reached for her hand, shielding her like she always had, but the evidence didn't bend to protection. It stood solid, unshaken. Adam tried laughter first, a nervous chuckle that died in his throat when no one joined him. Then came denial, his words tumbling over each other, weak and unconvincing. He said the records were wrong, that the receipts didn't prove anything. I stayed silent, because silence in that moment was louder than any accusation. The family looked at me, not at him, and they saw the truth written in my calm. The dinner table was no longer a place of celebration. It had become a courtroom. The jury wasn't robed in black, but their eyes delivered judgment all the same. My mother's voice wavered as she tried to scold me for embarrassing everyone on Christmas Eve, but even she couldn't mask the crack in her tone. She knew the weight of what I held could not be dismissed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand apologies. I simply stood, adjusted my jacket, and looked at the three of them, my wife, my brother, my mother. They had built their conspiracy in whispers and shadows. I had torn it open in the brightest room of the year. And now, with everyone watching, they could no longer pretend. The silence that followed my words was heavier than any storm outside. Claire's eyes darted from the papers back to me, her lips moving without sound. Adam sat rigid, his grin long gone, his hands pressed flat against the table as though bracing against collapse. My mother, usually so quick to take control, seemed frozen, her polished mask slipping with every second of quiet that stretched between us. It was my uncle who finally broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Is this true?" No one answered. That silence, that refusal to meet his gaze, was louder than any admission. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably, forks abandoned, plates untouched. Christmas Eve dinner had become a reckoning. Claire tried to speak then, her words tumbling, desperate. She said it wasn't what it looked like, that mistakes had been made, that she loved me, that the baby didn't change anything. My mother rushed to add her own defense, scolding the room for judging, insisting families should forgive. But the evidence sat between us, undeniable. Their words felt like paper shields in a storm. Adam attempted bravado. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and muttered that this was my way of ruining Christmas, that I'd always been jealous, always resentful. His voice cracked halfway through, the arrogance slipping into fear. He glanced at my mother for support, but even she couldn't hold the weight anymore. Her silence condemned him more than my words ever could. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply remained still, letting their panic unravel in front of everyone. Relatives who had once laughed at Adam's charm now looked at him with disgust. Aunts shook their heads. Cousins whispered. Even the children, from the other room, felt the shift in the air and went quiet. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. When my mother finally spoke, it wasn't with her usual authority. Her voice was thin, trembling, stripped of its power. She admitted she had known. She said she only wanted to protect the family, to keep things from falling apart. But her confession only deepened the fracture. Protecting them had meant betraying me. Protecting secrets had meant destroying trust. I stood then, slowly, deliberately. I didn't need to say much. I only said that I was done. Done with lies, done with whispers, done with pretending. I looked at each of them, my wife, my brother, my mother, and left the words hanging. The rest of the family could fill in the silence themselves. I gathered the envelope, tucked it back into my jacket, and walked away from the table. Behind me, voices rose, some angry, some pleading, some stunned into silence. But I didn't turn back. I had delivered the truth, and the truth didn't need me to stay. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, snow falling in steady sheets, I realized something. This wasn't the end of the battle. This was only the collapse of their first defense. The real war, the aftermath, was only beginning. And I was ready. The morning after Christmas Eve, the house felt hollow, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of the truth. Wrapping paper lay crumpled in corners. Dishes sat untouched in the sink, but the silence was deeper than any mess. Claire didn't come home that night. Adam disappeared too. My mother called once, then twice, her messages strained, urging me to think about family, to avoid rash decisions. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table where the envelope had rested just hours before. The evidence was still inside my jacket pocket, but I no longer needed it. The entire family had witnessed the collapse. Secrets hidden for months had been exposed in a single evening. Their denials, their excuses, their shifting expressions, they were burned into everyone's memory. No folder could be louder than what had already been seen. In the days that followed, the ripple spread. Relatives called me privately, some offering sympathy, others confessing they had suspected but never dared to say. My mother tried to rally support, telling anyone who would listen that families forgive, that Christmas should not be remembered for division. But the words rang hollow. She had chosen sides long before, and now no one trusted her voice. Claire returned briefly, not to apologize, but to plead. She said we could fix this, that we could move past mistakes. She reminded me of the life we had built, the years we had shared. But every word felt rehearsed, another attempt to patch a structure already collapsed. I listened in silence, giving her nothing. My silence rattled her more than anger ever could. When she realized I wouldn't respond, she left again, slamming the door hard enough to shake the walls. Adam didn't dare face me. I heard he had retreated to a friend's apartment, avoiding calls, avoiding questions. His charm, once his shield, had evaporated. The golden boy was now just a man stripped bare, his arrogance replaced by whispers of shame. My mother, still clinging to her instinct to protect him, grew desperate. She left messages begging me to keep things quiet, to remember blood over betrayal. I erased them all. At work, I returned to normalcy. My colleagues asked about the holidays, and I told them only that it had been eventful. I drafted blueprints, reviewed deadlines, carried myself with the same calm I had before. But inside, the foundation of my life was being rebuilt. Brick by brick, in silence, I was constructing a new version of myself, one not tied to lies, not dependent on those who had betrayed me. Christmas Eve had been the demolition. Now came the rebuild. I didn't need revenge. Revenge burns fast and leaves only ashes. What I needed was clarity, and clarity had already arrived. The truth was no longer hidden, and those who had tried to bury it were now trapped beneath its weight. My next steps would be deliberate, quiet, permanent, and this time, I wouldn't just expose them. I would erase their power over me completely. By New Year's, the fractures were complete. What had been a family was now a collection of broken alliances, each scrambling to protect themselves from the fallout. I didn't need to push. They were doing the work for me. Claire tried one last time. She showed up at the house, pale and exhausted, her voice stripped of its usual sharpness. She said she wanted to talk, that she wanted to explain. She used words like mistake and forgiveness, but I knew they weren't meant for me. They were meant to save herself from the consequences pressing in. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, listening in silence. When she finished, I told her nothing, not a word. She searched my face for anger, for softness, for anything she could manipulate. What she found was stillness. She left in tears, her footsteps echoing across the frozen driveway. Adam never came. His absence spoke louder than any confession. He avoided family gatherings, avoided calls. Relatives began to speak about him in hushed tones, no longer the golden boy, but the man who had destroyed his own brother's home. His silence wasn't strength. It was fear. And that fear spread until even my mother couldn't defend him. She tried, of course. She came to me with that familiar tone of authority, the one she had used my whole life to keep me in line. She said I was overreacting, that family secrets should remain private, that exposing Adam and Claire had only hurt everyone. I let her speak. I let her repeat her excuses, her attempts to twist guilt onto me. And when she finished, I told her calmly, without raising my voice, that her protection of Adam had ended her protection of me. From that moment forward, I was done being her obedient son. The silence that followed was absolute. She had no reply. For the first time in my life, she had no power left to wield. I began making changes quickly. Claire's things were boxed and placed on the porch. The locks were changed. Papers were filed quietly, methodically, with the same precision I had used to build my case. I didn't broadcast my actions. I didn't shout them from rooftops. I simply moved forward, step by step, until the ties were severed. At work, no one knew the details. They only noticed that I seemed lighter, more focused. Projects that had lingered now came together smoothly. My colleagues joked that I must have found a secret to stress management. They didn't know the truth. Silence had been my secret all along. By the time January closed, I was living alone in the house that once felt like a cage. The rooms were quiet, but not empty. They were mine again. Each evening, when I walked through the door, I felt no weight pressing down, no lies waiting to be uncovered. Just silence. Clean, sharp, final. Claire was gone. Adam was gone. Even my mother's voice had faded into the distance. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Winter lingered into February, and with it came a new rhythm. The house was quiet, stripped of the voices that once filled it, but that quiet was no longer heavy. It was clean. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the hum of the heater, the whisper of snow against the windows, belonged to me again. People expected me to fall apart. Friends asked carefully if I was doing all right, if I needed company. Colleagues offered subtle invitations, afraid I was drowning in solitude. I thanked them all, but I didn't explain. They wouldn't have understood that silence wasn't my enemy. It was my victory. Claire faded into the background quickly. I heard she tried to lean on mutual friends, but none wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Her pregnancy was no longer a secret, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She called once, leaving a voicemail about forgiveness, about rebuilding. I deleted it without listening to the end. My silence answered her more firmly than words ever could. Adam remained a ghost. He didn't show his face at family gatherings, not even when my mother begged him to. His absence became its own confession, proof that arrogance couldn't withstand exposure. The brother who once thrived on attention now hid from it. That was punishment enough. My mother tried a few more times to reach me. She left messages about family bonds, about letting go of anger. But I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades. Silence remains. One evening, I wrote her a short letter. Not cruel, not loud, just final. I told her I no longer needed her protection, and I no longer offered her my trust. I signed my name, sealed it, and sent it. She never replied. In the months that followed, I rebuilt piece by piece. I poured myself into my work, into designs that stretched higher, sharper, cleaner. Each project felt like laying a new foundation inside myself. The man who had once been blind to cracks now saw everything clearly. My colleagues called me meticulous. They didn't know the truth. I had learned vigilance the hard way. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about Christmas Eve. The long table, the candles, the moment the envelope touched the wood. The silence that followed. That silence had been my greatest weapon. It had spoken louder than rage, louder than confrontation. It had left them defenseless, forcing them to face themselves. I didn't need to win loudly. I didn't need applause or sympathy. I had taken back my life without raising my voice. And in the end, that was enough. Now, when I stand at my window watching the snow fall, I don't think about betrayal. I think about survival. About how quiet can be sharper than steel, heavier than stone, stronger than fire. Some men fight back with rage. I fought back with silence. And silence, in the end, was the only sound they remembered. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.